Hey everyone, and happy Sunday. Well, I want to share with you something that is actually happening, and as a consequence of this whole Russia Ukraine thing, which might have a direct impact on AMC stock. Now, I'm talking about US banks' exposure to Russia. Since this whole thing started between Russia and Ukraine, there's been a bunch of sanctions trying to put the economy of Russia down, forcing, Mr. Putin to actually change course and actually get back to where things were normally before this whole invasion started. One aspect of that is actually, well, if once since the ruble, which is the financial, the currency of Russia, is actually crippling down at a rapid extent since the last, pretty much the last week entirely, the financial sector of Russia has been totally close to not moving, because financial markets are closed. All right. Pretty much all the billionaires, whether they are in telecommunication, whether they're in retail, in oil, in gas, in energy, in transportation, in financial, it doesn't matter. Russian billionaires are losing their net worth at a rapid pace. Again, given all these sanctions. So as a consequence, what is happening is, well, since the economy of Russia is slowly going back to, nobody knows it's going to go to zero, but there are really high chances of either a financial crisis starting or, a recession definitely, meaning bad things are set up for the economy in Russia. So if you are doing business in Russia as a consequence of that, if you are a company investing or already invested a lot of money into the Russian economy, then you may start to actually say and kiss bye-bye to your money in Russia if things doesn't change rapidly. So when it comes to US banks exposure to Russia actually is kind of still unclear given this article from Reuters and the risk of a long-term impacts based on exactly what is happening here. Stay with me and you will see exactly what I'm talking about. The US bank's exposure to Russia may not be fully understood by investors due to a lack of transparency in disclosures made so far, and banks that get significant revenue from global operations could take a hit in the long run. The exposure so far disclosed by US banks is roughly $15 billion compared to Italian, French, and Austrian banks, which combined have just $42.5 billion in exposure in Russia. So the US banks appear to be a little less of a risk, but we are still talking about $15 billion. Now, it gets very interesting because Citigroup in particular seems to be among US banks one of the rare or the only one having a lot of money involved in Russia. All right. So this is where it gets interesting for AMC stockholders. Citigroup surprised analysts on Monday saying that its total exposure to Russia amounted to nearly $10 billion, far higher than previously communicated. All right. The new number takes into account cash held at the Bank of Russia and other financial institutions, reverse repo, and additional exposure to Russians' counterparties. Of course, Citigroup's revised total raised the question of whether other banks have higher exposure than so far. Right? In a research noted publicly on Tuesday, JP Morgan analysts said that in general, transparency on exposure by banks to Russia is low, meaning most banks do not give the net exposures, as you can read here. So you will tell me or ask me, well, AC, what is that even has to do with AMC? Well, first off, if you look at these details from all the banks and the money they have owned into, or they have invested, I should actually say, invested into Russia, here is the detail. All right. So you have Goldman Sachs, you have Bank New York of Mellon, you have JP Morgan Chains, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Morgan Stanley. So the very fact that this much money in Citigroup, for example, which, by the way, I tell you, as I showed you earlier, could be sitting in an amount of $10 billion, with everything happening there, it means they could actually consider that money gone, meaning they will lose significant money when it comes to all the business and all the banks and all the the financial assets from Russia they hold. Now, when you look at the stock price of Citigroup, right? Let's just look it up quickly here. Citigroup stock has been losing a ton of money for the last 6 months since this whole thing started. 20 in the last month, it's already down 14%. But in these last 5 days, it's been slowly going back from 16. At some point, it went down. But when you compare it to another bank, for example, like Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, it is not as critical, all right? Just because the money that Citigroup has invested in Russia is a lot more, higher than the others. But the thing is, according to this article, which is kind of going back to the whole transparency thing, these $10 billion may not even be the net number. It may be a lot more higher than that. Now, this is where it gets very juicy for AMC stockholders. Citigroup might also be part of some of the banks that are, even if they own AMC stock, on the long side, meaning they bought some shares, they also, and might also, this is a probability because, since they don't disclose the short positions, you cannot really tell 100% and be sure because no document, neither Fintel or MarketBeat or even Nasdaq.com will tell you that information because it's barely probable and possible that Citigroup as a bank and many other companies and hedge funds here disclose the short positions. But given what Bank of America and other big banks like Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs are doing with AMC, even if they have a big long positions like like Citigroup does, usually they also have a significant amount of position when it comes to the short selling side. So if Citigroup has significant money invested into the short selling, and because of Russia, they are losing $10 billion a share, and the share price is dropping and has been dropping significantly in the last 6 months, well, it is not good for them. Why? They will try to upset, they will try to offset, they will try to cover, they will try to find ways into making sure they're not losing additional money. So this may act as a trigger for them to say, you know what, we only own what in AMC stock in terms of, a total position when it comes to long versus short. Maybe it's $10 million, maybe it's $15 million, maybe it's more. I don't know. But when you compare that to 10 billion, I will rather not lose 10 billion and save maybe 10 million. I mean, I may be wrong here somewhere, but to me, it's kind of the logical thing to do. So based on this, you could expect companies like Citigroup or other short sellers who may have an exposure to what is happening in Russia to cost them a lot of money. And because of that, well, when you cost a lot of money, if you are involved in a stock and, the value of that investment is dropping, you either add additional cash or you raise or you put up with what we call a collateral, either in securities or any other assets. But given the current market conditions, that may not sound a smart move. So either way, they will have to get out or they will have to add some money. But either way, it will have to cost them to do something in order to save this amount of money already invested into AMC stock. And that's why we may start seeing these short sellers covering a little bit here and there because of what is happening in Russia. So it may not have necessarily happen, tomorrow, next week, or, again, given on the fluidity and how this whole thing with Russia goes, it's a whole, how do they call it? Not really speculation, but high possibility or high probability. So based on that, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a quick sharp in the share price of AMC in the next coming days, if again what is happening in Russia doesn't get resolved. Otherwise, it may be already too late. So too late for them means good for us holding AMC.